Hello, happy Friday. I hope everybody's had a great week. I hope your weekend's going to be full of rest and joy and that you feel loved. If you're new here, welcome. We're doing a brief Cliff Notes version of biographies of all of the, well, not all of the, but a good chunk of the men and women who made the church what it is today. In Bible studies and things, we see what we do scripturally, and we see what the Church of Acts did. Of course, we study those things, but there's a gap between when that ends and when the church that we know today begins. And so we're just taking a peek into that historical gap at all the men and women that helped shape the church to be the institution that it is today, and the testimony that it is today, how it survived all these years in spite of scandal and abuses and all of the other things that go into it. So welcome. If that sounds like your cup of tea, just a brief little look at history, please hit that like button and subscribe so that you get, and the notification button so that you get notified whenever we download. We upload every Friday, and so you can watch that. We put the link to our Facebook page at Living by Grace 40383, and then we also have a website, livinggrace40383.com. So you're welcome to visit any of those. You're welcome to use the comment section. We encourage you to use the comment section. We like dialogue, and we like to be able to respond and have a relationship with everybody. If you've already been here and you're already subscribed, thank you for returning. Thank you for choosing to spend a little chunk of your time with us and to support the ministry that we have going. We do appreciate you. So today we are going to get into Erasmus. There's a lot on him, and so I tried to make it as brief as possible. We don't like our videos to get too crazy long, but we kind of narrowed it down as best we could. So we're going to talk about him today. Erasmus was the most influential. He was the greatest scholar of the Northern Renaissance era. A lot of what you are going to hear today is going to be very much a mirror of a lot of what we stand for at Living Grace, a lot of what we believe at Living Grace. There's several parallels that you'll be able to draw, maybe even through if you're not a grace-based church, or if you're not even in church, there's probably going to be some parallels that you draw, and you find that you kind of identify more with him than any of the other guys we've covered so far. He was born on October the 28th in 1466. He was born with the name Gerard Gerardson. Yeah, his parents must have loved him. His name was Gerard Gerardson. Now, his dad was Roger Gerardson, but when they christened him Erasmus, and Erasmus just meaning beloved. His mother, her name was Margaret. She was the daughter of a physician. His father was a priest, and it was Roger Gerard. They were not married. Erasmus was an illegitimate offspring of their union. They never legitimized that in any way. And it seems to be a growing theme that we have with what's going on in history as we lead up to this. Sexual purity really isn't a lot to it. We see St. Augustine with an illegitimate son, and we see many that come and practice illegitimate, frequency. And so that, as much as we see it in the church today, we shouldn't be surprised, because apparently that was just a thing. We struggle with that. But he was illegitimate, and he lived with his parents. When he was 4, they began his education. And so from 4 to 8, he just kind of did general education that you would do at that age. But at 9, his dad sent him to a very prestigious Latin grammar school. And at this point, Erasmus discovers, one, he absolutely loves learning. He became like a sponge, absorbing everything. And 2, he had an uncanny ability, and it came easy for him to learn. He was able to retain what he was taught and recall it at will. He was able to retain a great deal of information. He enjoyed it. It was his passion. He just had this ability to learn it quickly, to remember it quickly, and then to be able to recall it, use it, and apply it in a way that far exceeded what others could do, and probably could still do today. He was, genius level scholar even at that young of an age. Now, when he's 17, he gets the bad news in 1483 that both of his parents have passed from the plague. It took them both. And so he's not of age yet, and he's an illegitimate child, and so he's given guardians. And these guardians decide his best course of action is to become a monk. And so they're very adamant that he pursue that line of profession. He's not necessarily against it. It's just not something he wanted to do. But unfortunately, in 1492, he's impoverished. He doesn't have a choice. He goes into the monks and has a monk life, if you will, because he just, as an illegitimate child, he had no heir or any claim to any land, to any property, to any valuables, to any money, anything that may have been left behind by his parents legally he didn't have a right to. He couldn't claim it because he was illegitimate. So that money would either go to maybe a sibling who was legitimate, or a nephew or a niece, someone else in the family, an heir that would qualify, or it would just get revert back to the state. It didn't belong. He couldn't claim it because he was an illegitimate child. So he finds himself in 1492 with a great education, but no money, no place to live, no place to go. And so he says, all right, I guess we're going to go be a monk. So he took on that life. He never actually performed the duties of a cleric at that time. He never really did any of the sacraments. He never really served the community by teaching or lecturing or something that the other monks may have been done. He never really did that. He did, however, develop a personal relationship with God, and this would be the driving force for the rest of his life. He found that in his scholarly pursuits, that he found God revealed in the scriptures. He found Jesus among creation. He was able to see and draw the parallels and understand how it's all connected and how it all works. And he was, because maybe he didn't have as much going on, he was able to spend the amount of time it would take to meditate on the scriptures and really be able to receive some divine wisdom and some divine guidance. And so he kind of rebels against the strict rules of it all. He rebels against the harsh methods that they used. He really didn't believe all of that was necessary. But he didn't like renounce it and be like, oh, you guys are crazy, you're dumb, don't do that. It was just very much I don't think that's all necessary, especially not for me in my walk. Now during this time, there's some whispers that he has a relationship. It's a lot of sources don't mention it at all. You can't find any mention of it. There are those that refute it adamantly, that say it did not happen. It's just, gossip and nonsense. But there are whispers in some places, if you dig deep enough, that he had a relationship with a fellow male student at that time. That he, I don't know if it was a lifelong love affair. I don't know if it was just a quick romp in the sheets. Who knows? But there is whispers that he had a relationship with another male student. Now, traditionally, the church is against homosexuality, so it goes in their favor to say, no, that's not true. It didn't happen, especially considering all the good things we got from Erasmus. But the truth is, like it or not, we're all going to do things, and you shouldn't be denounced for it. So maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I think maybe he did, just because I can't imagine that any human being goes through life without having a relationship of some sort with anyone. And since there's no mention of any other relationships in his life, it's not hard to believe that maybe this is why he didn't have any other relationships in his life. But regardless, that's all, whatever you want to make of it, that's all. None of it's really founded in fact. It's just kind of like I said, it's whispers, it's rumors, it's brought up here and there, and it's not necessarily something that we cling to. So he becomes an adult in this environment, and he catches his first big break. He gets to be the secretary to the Bishop of Chambray. Now, the Bishop of Chambray takes him in as his secretary and notices immediately that he has this amazing knack with Latin. Of course, we know he was brought up in a Latin grammar school. So the bishop's like, wow, this kid knows Latin really, really well, and he's able to read it and he's able to say it. Because a lot of times you would have people, especially a lot of scribes would come in of the time that could read it, but they couldn't really put it into words when they were trying to translate it. Or they could speak it fluently, but if you put a book in front of them, it would take them 3 hours to figure out and get it translated. Whereas Erasmus could read and talk and flip it back and forth like it was nobody's business. And so the bishop's like, this kid's got a knack. In addition to that, he noticed that Erasmus was very eager to learn. He was very eager for knowledge. He wasn't pompous in this ability that he had. It was very much because of this, I can do more. I can learn more. I can find more. And he admired that in Erasmus. And from that, the bishop enabled Erasmus to get to travel to Paris, where he got to study Latin much more extensively, and he got to study some classic literature as well, which plays into hand as he goes on, because classic literature, a lot of it at the time was in Greek. And so he was able to kind of stretch out maybe some of his language skills, and he was able to really get deep into the Latin, and then he was able to kind of grow there. So in Paris, he becomes the scholar that society begins to recognize. He becomes the guy you go to. He was a very popular scholar. He was lecturing on a regular basis. He was just the top guy. He becomes the nerd, right? The guy in school who's always reading a book, who has all of the answers, but is still asking all of the questions. And I mean, this is Erasmus to a T, and he's embraced in society for this. There comes a point where he has a pupil named Lord Montjoy, and Lord Montjoy is of nobility, and he's got money to burn. And for whatever reason, and it's not clear, I couldn't find like if they hung out a lot or if, his life was changed, but for whatever reason, Lord Montjoy decides he's going to give Erasmus a pension. So what this means is his solicitor, however it was set up, usually it would be a yearly thing or a bi-yearly thing, and he gives them money to live on. And it's enough that Erasmus gets independence. He doesn't have to be the secretary to the bishop. He doesn't have to owe anything to anybody. He doesn't have to return and do everybody else's work. He can now just learn. He can now just study and just seek knowledge. He can now say what he wants, say what he thinks, share what he experiences without worries of it being a rough repercussion of somebody he may be serving or a patron. Lord Montjoy's pension gives him a freedom like he hadn't had before. And so Erasmus takes full advantage of it. And for the next 10 years, he freely tours, he lectures, he gets more knowledge, he studies, and he splits his time between France, between England and the Netherlands. The Netherlands because he's Dutch, that's where he's from. Holland was where he was born. So he kind of splits his time for the next 10 years between those. So at this time, we're getting close to the 1500s. And at the 1500s, Erasmus starts publishing books and publishing them widely. He wants them available to anybody and everybody that wants one. They're going to be able to get one. So there's a lot of copies published. There's a lot of distribution done during this time. And this is significant because written books were not available in this area very widely until about 50 years prior to this. People were only getting books for about 50 years before Erasmus comes on the scene and starts saying, hey, reading and learning is a big deal, and such a big deal that I'm going to make sure it gets into the hands of everybody who wants to do it. Everybody will have an equal opportunity to be able to do this and to be able to study this. The other thing this does is it creates an audience for Martin Luther. Now, Erasmus never really agreed 100% with Martin Luther, but the one thing that Erasmus ended up inadvertently doing for Martin Luther is this, the publishing of the books. Because what it did was it created an audience for Christian topics, an audience that was looking to learn about Christian topics, an audience that was watching for Christian topics. It became the cultural thing was to study and to read the Christian topics. And so they were always looking for his next writing or his next book or the next thing that he may have endorsed. So when Martin Luther comes on the scene, he doesn't have to cultivate this audience. He doesn't have to go and find people and create this audience. Erasmus has already done it. They're ripe and ready. They're open. They're watching. They're reading. They're listening. So he kind of paves the way for Martin Luther in that way with the written word and with publishing as widely as he did. He's also well known as being the very first editor of the New Testament. Now, this is really cool because it kind of harkens back to what a lot of us are doing even now. He was looking at the New Testament and he was reading the New Testament and he was looking at the versions that were available at the time, and he was saying, wait a minute, I studied classic literature in Paris, remember, from the best, and that's a lot of it's in Greek. So he's looking at this New Testament translation and he's going, I don't think you got it right. I think there's a lot here that you missed in translation. And I think that because I know the Greek says this, and that doesn't really translate to what you've done. And he starts putting an emphasis on returning to the original language and translating from the original reference point. Instead of translating from, okay, the first edition was translated, and then the next one was revised of that translation, and then revised of that translation. And so Erasmus said, no. You go all the way back to the original language and do it from there. That's very much what we're doing today. A lot of the Christian theological schools, a lot of seminary. I did it. I had a whole course on how to do it when I was getting my degree. We're all going back to what did the original Greek say? I don't want to know what Matthew Henry said. I don't want to know what Martin Luther said. I don't want to know all of these newer translations. They're good and they're great and I'm going to read them. But if I really want to get into the meat of things, what did the Greek say? Because we lose a little bit when we translate. And so it's better to get the real I used to work for an attorney, and he would say all the time, just because it's not written in black and white doesn't mean you can't understand it. He would say it's the spirit of the law. The law may not say it outright, but you know the point of it. You know what it's getting at. And so by going back to the Greek, they were able to get the point of it. They were able to get the spirit of what it was written instead of the translator's interpretation of what they must mean. And so he was a really big proponent of doing that. And like I said, that's held true even today. We still like to go all the way back to the Greek to really figure out where that's at and what's going on. He attempted to kind of reform the church from within. He didn't want to come on the outside and just attack it nonstop. He didn't want to create commissions or committees or groups that would challenge it by any means. He was in the church. He was a priest. He He felt like if he was on the inside and with his knowledge and with his learning, that he could show them and teach them, because he was very big on lecturing. He was very big on teaching, just like he was on learning. And so his thought wasn't that the church was crooked or evil. It was that they were uninformed. They were missing the mark. They were messing up because they didn't have learning. And so he thought from within he could teach them and they could change. He saw a lot of truth in the Protestant Reformation. We're going to study that a little bit more when we talk about Martin Luther next week, but it's starting to gain ground at this point. And he saw a lot of truth in what they were saying. In the same breath, he saw a lot of truth in what the Catholic Counter-Reformation was saying, which was kind of just the counter to the Protestant Reformation. And he was looking at him and he was like, say, hey, this camp, you're absolutely right on some stuff. And this camp, you are absolutely right on some stuff. But both camps, you are absolutely wrong on some stuff too. And so he didn't subscribe to either one. He didn't ally himself with either one. He was very much this church can be reformed from within, because you're not wrong because you're bad. You're wrong because you don't know. Whereas the Protestant Reformation was saying you're wrong because you're bad. And so he couldn't quite pull those two together. And that's kind of where he stood. He believed and he encouraged growth from knowledge. He believed if you ultimately wanted growth, if you wanted change, it had to be born from knowledge. It had to be born from learning. He never really made an official attack on the church. He never made official accusations on the church, because his argument was every human being should be learning every day, and we should be growing every day. So if that's the case, we're also changing every day. So if today I say, this is the stance I take, this is wrong, and then tomorrow I learn something new and I grow and I change my opinion, then I've just made myself a liar. And people might not know that I've grown and made this opinion, and they're still holding to the original one. And so to avoid confusion, he would just simply say, when people would want him to outright say the Catholic Church was wrong or outright say the Protestant Reformation was wrong, he would say, we're all growing, we're all human, and we're all figuring it out. And so a lot of people called him wishy-washy. A lot of people think that, he wouldn't make a stand one way or the other. I think it is a very mature mind that is able to say, you know what? I know what I think right now, but I'm also well aware that opinion could change. I'm also well aware God is bigger than that, and he doesn't have to fit into any box. And who knows what I may get taught, what I may learn tomorrow. Lord willing, more. Lord willing, better, right? And so it kind of kept him from being under attack, like what we saw with John Wycliffe, like what we saw with some of the other guys that we've studied when the church, would denounce them, or when the church would come against them for being heretics. That didn't happen here, because he didn't openly, outrightly make a stand and accuse them of doing any kind of wrongdoing. He just wanted to reform it from the inside. So his belief basically was he rejected the idea of predestination and powers restricted to the papacy. Predestination meaning he believed a relationship with God trumped any idea that he believed if you have a personal relationship with God, God wasn't going to tell you, oh, well, I decided before I knew you, you're going to die and go to hell. He was like, God doesn't do that. That doesn't make sense. That doesn't correlate to the scriptures. So he was like, I don't believe in predestination. And then when it came to the church saying there were certain powers, certain things that only the Pope could do, he was like, well, that's not true, because our power is given through relationship with God. If God gives us our power, then only God can take it away. Man doesn't give us power, so man can't restrict us from it either. And that was his stance on that. He also valued liberty way more than orthodoxy, more than tradition. He was like, freedom matters more than making me follow a list of rules. If I have the freedom to choose whether or not I do that thing, that is a more authentic action of mine than when I choose to do it, than if you make me do it, right? So he was very much about liberty, the freedom to choose over tradition, and this is just what you have to do because that's what you do. He didn't feel like that was fostering good relationships with God. He felt like learning was a very important element to holiness. He felt like if you were learning and you were learning stuff and it didn't result in a more holy life and it didn't result in a better relationship with God, that it had very little value to learn it. He also believed that if you were holy or professed to be holy and you were a good person in that, you were, awesome in the faith and awesome in the church, he felt like if you didn't have any learning to fortify that, if you didn't have the knowledge to back that up, that was shallow, that it was empty and it was useless. He was like, one without the other is useless. If you have a bunch of learning, but it doesn't draw you close to God, there's no value in it. And if you have a bunch of religious rites and religious rituals and a history of my daddy was a priest, my granddaddy was a priest, my granddaddy was a priest, but you don't have any knowledge about why you do what you do and how it relates to what Jesus really wants, it's shallow and empty, and it's not good for you either. So he kind of took that stance to things. He also believed that an active lifestyle was a huge element to being holy. And when I say that, I mean he meant works. He felt like if you had a relationship with God, that would be seen in charity and giving, whether that was money or a home to people or a place of lodging to travelers or food to whoever. I mean, there's a lot of different ways we can give even today. And so he was like, you give charity. And he said, you do good works. You just do good things. Not in the expect to get something back, not as a contract, not because you want people to think you're good, but you just naturally have an active lifestyle that gives generously and does good. That's going to be an outpouring of who you are if you're really growing and learning and understanding the scriptures. He rejected any legalistic ideas of obedience. He believed that real, true obedience only comes from a personal relationship with God. He said people who are obedient just because you tell them to be obedient, when you're not looking, they're not being obedient. That's not real obedience. That's subservience at best, you know? So he was like, if you want them to be really obedient, that has to be from a relationship with Christ, because that means they're going to be obedient whether you're looking or not. And that's what you're looking for. And that's why there was a lot of hypocrisy in the church, because when everybody was watching, they did what they were supposed to, but when they weren't watching, they did what they wanted to. And so that led to a lot of disillusionment and why the reformations were happening. And so he was saying, you can't replace one for the other. You have to have a personal relationship with the Lord. He criticized inconsistency in the leadership. He took on those things. He didn't call them bad people. He didn't, bash them in the press like John Wycliffe did. He just, would come on one-on-one and say, hey, there's some stuff that doesn't make sense here. One of the biggest things he pointed out was the foolishness of buying forgiveness. In the church at this time, if you slept with your brother's wife and had an illegitimate child the next town over, and then you stole corn from a farmer's field on the walk home, and you went to the church and you told them all of these things and you gave the church $200, the church would be like, you're forgiven. And then people would walk away thinking they had a clean slate and they could do whatever they wanted as long as they went back to the church, gave some money, and the priest called them forgiven. He would come out, Erasmus would come out and be like, that's foolish. That's absolutely foolish. That's the craziest thing I could ever think you could get a clean slate just by dropping some coins in the plate. It doesn't work that way. And so he would talk about that. He would say, that's silly. He wouldn't say, you're corrupt and you're stealing from the people. He would say, that's silly because the Greek says in the Bible, and he would draw them back to learning and draw them back to teaching. He believed a personal relationship with Jesus, with the Lord, was strengthened by knowledge. If you didn't seek knowledge, it would be very difficult for you to have a strong personal relationship with the Lord. So he was very much into learning, very much into scholarship. And I back that completely. I believe that, I've said that from my pulpit. If you don't know what the Bible says, if you don't know the scriptures, then how do you know God loves you? How do you know who he is? How do you know he wants the best for you? How does that hold up when the storms come? Because you don't have any proof, you don't have any evidence, you don't have anything or anyone telling you. You got to know the Bible. And so I subscribe to that. I agree with Erasmus. A personal relationship with God is very much strengthened by knowledge of his word, by knowledge of what he stands for, what he believes, and who he is. Now, when he's 69, on July 12th, 1536, in a few months he'd turn 70 in October, but it's July, Erasmus passes away. He gets very ill and he dies from dysentery. And it wasn't uncommon for people to die from dysentery at that time. He did remain loyal to the church, but he did not receive last rites at his death. There is no indication that he even asked for a priest. He was sick for a little bit. I mean, he didn't just die instantly. He wasn't out of his mind. He was able to speak and know, but there's no documentation that he ever asked for a priest to even come to his bedside for the rituals, for the last rites that they would have done. And so I think his last act in dying was revealing that he practiced what he preached. He was saying, I believe that a personal relationship with the Lord trumps any religious ritual and any methodology that you might want to use, any traditional doctrine. A personal relationship with Jesus, in the end, that is all that matters. And as he died, he lived that. He didn't want a priest coming and ushering him into heaven. He didn't need that. He didn't need last rites. He just needed to walk with the man he's known his whole life into heaven. He just needed Jesus to usher him home, and he knew he had a personal relationship with him. He knew who Jesus was. He knew where he was going, and that was enough. That was all that mattered. And so his last act, as he lay dying, was saying, I don't need all of that extra pomp and circumstance. I have a relationship with Jesus, and for me, I know that's enough. I hope you have a personal relationship with Jesus, and I hope you know in this moment, that's enough. Y'all have a great Friday. We'll see you next Friday.